I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss. More than this, I wish you love.
Welcome to the Forgiveness Solution Podcast. I'm Reverend Misty Time. I'm so glad you're here today. You can find me at revmisty.com, and also you can send me your forgiveness questions at revmisty@outlook.com. I would love to hear from you. Today, we're going to talk about real forgiveness in a real life forgiveness situation. Yep, you know, real life gives us real situations, and that's where unforgiveness happens. Today, we're going to talk to Aurora Carrillo. Why? Because she has an amazing story to share with us. Aurora is a triathlete, an Iron Woman, and a mom, and a wife. And in that time, she was diagnosed with a progressive disease. And that was in 2008. And through lifestyle changes, Aurora was able to stop this progressive disease and become symptom-free for the past 5 years?
7
years, Aurora. And she's been able to do 32 triathlons. I mean, really. That's pretty big. So I know some days it's hard to get out of bed, not do 33 triathlons. And an Ironman, oh my goodness.
Half Ironman.
And a half Ironman. Wow. But she's going to talk today about a couple things that we don't always talk about. Situational forgiveness, and then also forgiveness, emotional forgiveness. Yep. That's what we're going to talk about with Aurora today. Aurora, say hi to everyone.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Well, Aurora's also been a speaker all over the world. She's been out of the country to speak about this amazing situation and pass on wonderful information to so many others and inspire others with MS. She's been on Shape Magazine, she's been on Fox News, and she's been married for 16 years to her wonderful husband, Robert. And she has how many kids, Aurora?
I have 4 kids, 3 boys and a girl.
Oh, they're amazing too. I happen to know them personally. Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. That's always a great place to start, right, Aurora?
Yes.
So let's start with that day you were diagnosed.
So I was diagnosed December of 2008. I was 35 years old and had 4 kids. All my 4 kids were under the age of 7. And it just started with a pain in the back of my right eye that got progressively worse to the point that it was excruciating. I couldn't roll my eye up, down, left, or right.
How old were you at the time?
35.
35.
Mm-hmm. And so I was seeing some specialists to see what was going on, and during that time the vision loss began. At first it was like someone took a squiggly line, an eraser, and erased a squiggly line in the center of my eye, and then it was from that line down, and then one day I was just blind in my right eye. So they rushed me for an MRI, and they told me that I had 10 lesions on my brain, and I had an extreme case of optic neuritis, which is inflammation of the optic nerve.
You had 10 lesions on your brain?
Yes.
What was that like for you to hear that? That must have been just devastating.
I think the time of my diagnosis, I didn't understand any of it. I thought I had what Michael J. Fox has, which is Parkinson's. It's extremely different from MS. I had no idea. My doctor never said multiple sclerosis. He kept saying MS, and I had no idea what that was. I just knew that there was an MS walk, and that couldn't be good.
Wow.
Wow.
So, yeah, I guess that's true.
I didn't know anything. It was once I got home after this diagnosis, which included, telling me it was an incurable progressive disease, that I'd be on medications my whole life, and that because of where my lesions were located, I would be in a wheelchair within the next 5 years because they were somewhere by my brainstem and on my brainstem.
Wow.
And so they put me 5 years in a wheelchair. They even said if I lived in a 2-storied home, I should start making arrangements to move to a 1-storied home because that would be my future. I would be in a wheelchair. So, it was all a lot of information, and I was really scared. And I don't think it was until being home and researching what it was that I understood the magnitude of what it was and how horrible this disease is and how unpredictable it is. And that's kind of when everything set in, that I understood what I was just diagnosed with, at such a young age.
Wow, that must have been at that moment, I mean, first of all, extremely overwhelming.
Yes.
I mean, to be hearing all of that come at you at once, and you're a young mom, you're a wife, that's not what you're thinking at that time. You're thinking about kids and school and all those young mom things and taking care of your family. You're not thinking about wheelchairs and moving because you need to be in a single level house and what your life is supposed to be and that you're supposed to be taken care of, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Wow. And then the fact that the information's coming at you so fast that you have to go home and research it to even try to get your brain around it, to try to understand it. That is so overwhelming. And I bet that happens to so many people. Anytime we get diagnosed, we only hear so much. And we have to try to go home and digest it. It feels like a ton of bricks on you.
Yeah, it really was. And like you said, I mean, I was a young mom at the time, and I'm trying to process everything I was just told and still take my kids to school and to soccer. And, one of my kids is only a year old and, just a baby, really. Now that I look back, I see pictures, I think he was just a baby and do all the mom things that were already so overwhelming to me. And then that on top of it, it was almost like too much for me to handle. We had just moved here and didn't know a lot of people. And it was a very dig deep kind of time for me to keep going because I was really alone. I mean, my husband's very supportive, but I didn't have a huge support system around me, like we're here for you kind of thing,
Because
so
you had just moved to a new city and
right.
Oh goodness,
yeah,
so,
it was everything. It was like the worst
well,
possible
check
timing.
the box for every major thing to happen to you. A new baby, a young family, move to a new city, and then have a major illness come and hit your way. Wow, that is usually when people look up at everything, and even though if they have a strong faith, that's great, but they still look up and say, why?
Yes, and I absolutely did that. In fact, I was shocked. I'm very strong in my faith, or I thought I was. And if someone would have asked me, what would you do if you were diagnosed with some horrible thing in the future? I would have said, I would have, I'd pray, I'd trust God, I'd, read my Bible, and I didn't do any of that. I got very angry. I questioned God. I didn't understand why. And one particular situation I remember is just going to pick up my kids at school, and they would shut the gate, for when school was in session. So everyone would just kind of gather before pickup at the front of this gate. So it was like massive amounts of parents waiting for these gates to open to go in and get your kids. And I just remember I was blind in my eye and I had these big glasses on and looking around at all the moms and being like, why me? Out of all these people, why is this happening to me? What did I do? And why would God give me 4 kids if I can't take care of them in the future? If I'm going to be in a wheelchair and I'm going to be sick and exhausted and not feeling my legs and losing feeling in my this and that, everything I was reading MS was, I'm thinking why. So that was my first go-to was, questioning God and being angry. How could he do this to me?
Well, I can see, and I bet whoever's listening could feel that same pit in your stomach, that immediate reaction. I mean, I can feel it just hearing you. My body is reacting to that feeling, and how sad and angry that must feel, and lonely.
Very much so. Yeah.
And lonely, and so many unanswered questions. And a lot of times when we pick up those angry feelings, which are totally understandable, it comes from the fear of the unknown.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're how many years from that moment?
It was 8 years in December.
8 years in December.
Yes, since I was diagnosed.
Wow.
It was my anniversary.
Yeah. So, we'd love to know the future, right? We would love to absolutely know what's going to happen. And you're going to tell us what those 8 years have been filled with. And you've had a remarkable story. But that moment you couldn't have possibly seen what those 8 years were going to be filled with. And wow, I just feel for you at that moment and the path that was in front of you. And it's so understandable to be angry with God, so understandable to be angry even with the doctors. So many people get angry at the system and the doctors and why these things are happening, and many times there aren't answers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right, that's exactly. And how did your family deal with all that?
So my husband, we didn't have any family here, in California. We just moved. So my husband was really supportive, as much as he could be. It's really hard when you're not going through it, But the one thing that he really gave me was a great gift. And I always say he literally stuck his hand down into like my deep depression hole, a pit of depression, and brought me out of it. Because at one point that I was, researching on the computer and crying and upset and just in this like overwhelmingness of they wanted me to choose a medication right away. And all these decisions I had to make that I just didn't feel like I had them. I couldn't make any decisions. I just felt like frozen in fear. And he said, Aurora, I understand this is hard for you. It's hard for all of us, but you need to fight this. You need to pray and ask God, what do you want me to learn through this? What do you want to show me? And if you keep doing what you're doing, which is being in fear and crying and, scared, you will put yourself in a wheelchair with what's happening up here. And he pointed, up to his head. And that really did something to me. It was like the moment where it was like I was shaken out of, this fog I was in of being scared and overwhelmed and depressed. And I thought, he's right. Like, I trust God. I know he's a big God. And I'm literally not even going to him for this. In fact, I'm kind of like pissed off and asking like, why me? Like, really? What have I done? And I'm thinking all these decisions I make. I gave up my career to be a stay-at-home mom. All these things. I'm like, okay, so this is what I get for that. Like, I just remember going through all these thoughts. And at that point, it was like literally took a different path. I decided, you know what, he's right. And I said a very simple prayer. I said, God, I don't know why you've given me this. I don't want it, but I trust you. So whatever you want to do here, do it. And it was very simple. And I was very open about how scared I was. And that was kind of the beginning of God taking me by the hand and being like, all right, let's go. Let's do this. And that's where the journey turned into, like you said, something I never would have expected it to turn into over 8 years. So.
Well, many times we do wonder what if God gave this to us, those kinds of things. And I've talked to many, many other clergy, and very, very wise clergy, by the way, that have often said to remember that we're spiritual beings having a human being experience, and that we're motors, that our bodies are human. That doesn't have anything to do with our spiritual being, right? God is crying with us. He's crying just as sad that our human body is broken, right? And he or the being of God would love to be with us and next to us and walk next to us, those footprints in the sand, wants to be with us and next to us and hold us up through the journey. And we forget to ask for God to hold us up. And I'm so pleased with that simple prayer. You ask God to help you and hold you up through that. And he's crying with you. And it's just as sad that happened to you also. So that's a beautiful way. So what happened after that, after your lovely husband pulled you up? And I'm so glad that you had that person to pull you up.
Oh, I'm so glad too. I would not be where I am today if that hadn't happened, that moment hadn't happened. So after that, I kind of went at it with a whole different attitude. I felt this strength that I can't explain. I mean, I remember talking to a friend of mine, and she would say, like, how are you okay right now? Like, I would be a mess. Like, how are you okay? And she hadn't talked to me the few days before that I was a mess. But after that moment, I just felt this like inner strength, like this fight in me. And it was different. And I just started looking at every option, every person I could to give me more information on MS because I had no idea what it was. I was looking on the internet and everything was very hopeless, very negative. And I think something in me was looking for like a little bit of hope, which I wasn't getting anywhere. So I reached out to my email list. I was on social media at the time, and I just told everyone on my email list, this is what's happened to me. This is what I was diagnosed with. Can you connect me with anyone you know that has MS? And people were writing me, like, my aunt in Australia has it, or this woman at the school, or, I know this person, that person, all over the world. And I used to work for the Washington Times. I was a journalist, and I got this notebook. I still have it, this thick notebook. And I just kept calling or meeting with people or however I could, and I would ask them the same questions. When did you get this? How old were you? What were your symptoms? What medication are you on? How's it working for you? And just question after question, trying to figure out how to go about this next step of how to handle this diagnosis. And everyone did the same thing. Everyone was on medication, different medications, but everyone was still really sick. And down the road, like 15 years, down the road, they didn't just have MS, but now they had MS and fibromyalgia, or MS and rheumatoid arthritis. And they would be sick for days after taking their medication, to then be kind of okay to go back to work. And I just thought, I don't want to live my life like that. But I didn't know what other choices I had. So out of all these people, there was 30 people actually that I talked to. One person was on medication, but they also went to this holistic center in Encinitas, by where I live. And they told me they teach me how to eat for MS, how to take supplements to help MS, and all these different things. And I thought, what? Like, what does that have to do with MS? Like, MS is a disease, and they're teaching you to eat. Like, I made no connection whatsoever with the two. But I was curious, and at that point, I had been blind for 30 days. I had seen 3 of the top neurologists in San Diego. They all said the exact same thing: wheelchair, 10 lesions, incurable, progressive. You'll be in a wheelchair and on medication your whole life. And so I was really kind of stuck to make a decision, and they were really pressuring me to make a decision. So I thought, I'm just going to go to this place, and it'll be my last shot, and I'll see what they say. And if I don't hear anything that's going to change my mind, I'm picking a medication, and I'm just going to start on that path. So I walk into this place. It's like holistic center. I'd never been to anything like that in my life, and I thought it was really weird. There was like people hook up to different IVs, which looked really creepy, but now I know they're just getting, vitamin B, vitamin C things. But I had never seen that before unless someone's like dying or something. So it was really weird for me. And I walked in, and the doctor told me to explain what had happened, and I did. And he said, okay, lay down on this table. And it was like those chiropractic or massage tables. And he lays me down, and he starts massaging my neck. And I pop up, and I said, what are you doing? I don't need a massage. I'm sick. I am 35. I have 4 kids. I have lesions on I'm in a wheelchair. I don't need a massage. Like, I need help. I need information. And he says, you don't understand. Your optic nerve connects your nerves. Your eyes connect to your neck. And by doing this massage, it's going to help to stimulate your sight back. And not just that, but you're so deficient in all these minerals and these vitamins, and you need to change your diet. You need to have an anti-inflammatory diet. And he just gave me all these things of how I should eat, how I shouldn't eat, and all this information. So I walk out of this place with a massage, all these huge bag of supplements I had to carry with both hands, and a huge bill because none of it was covered by insurance. And I just remember that day, it never rains here in San Diego, but that day it was pouring rain. And I remember running in my car, soaking wet with this bag, and shutting the door and just sobbing. Like, I am so desperate for information that I just got conned by these crazy holistic people for this. Like, this is awful, because I just felt like they just robbed me of my time and everything. Because I had seen the best of the best doctors, and they had told me none of these things, that there was any hope for me, or that my vision would come back, or there's anything I could do about this disease. And so I went home, and I knew that my diet wasn't good. I knew I didn't take care of myself. I was always skinny, so I thought I was healthy. And I thought,
which lots of moms run around, and we don't take care of ourselves.
No.
And we don't eat right, and absolutely, we don't exercise, we don't eat right.
We
correct.
take care of everyone else. And, what I've learned, and what I always say when I speak, is you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't expect to be a great mom and a great wife and give to your community and everybody else if you haven't filled yourself up.
Right.
And to me, the way I was raised, that was almost looked at as a selfish thing. You give, you give to your family, and who cares about you, And that was just doing what I saw growing up, which it's not healthy, and it's not a good example, to my family either. So I decided it can't hurt to do this, but I'll never go back there again, I thought. So I began the supplements. I began eating that way. I mean, just exactly what they told me to do, I did, which is just so not me. At the time, I was so not disciplined with my lifestyle in that way, my diet, the way I ate nothing. But I was scared to death, so I just did everything that paper told me. And within a few days, I started seeing some light in my vision. I called my neurologist, and I said, I can see something. And he said, don't get excited. It's just sometimes your nerves fire off, and, when you're having these issues with your eye. But remember, your vision's gone. So whatever's happening right now is just, it's just part of the nerves. And so I said, okay. And then a few days later, the light became clear, and then I started seeing color, and then the color wasn't so blurry, and it became clear. And 2 weeks after that massage and these changes, I could see better than before. My vision had gone up to that point. They had to decrease the prescription in my right eye for my contact lenses. And at that point, when I went in for that appointment for my contacts, and they said, we have to decrease your prescription in your right eye, is when I thought, okay, there's something to all this weird holistic alternative stuff. if I can see right now, I was blind and I can see, and all the optometrists said I would never be able to. What else don't they know? What else aren't they familiar with maybe that I need to find out? So I just dove into everything that was alternative and holistic living, using food as medicine, and began changing my life in that way. And from that, just started a snowball effect of changing my lifestyle, getting more active. I'd always wanted to race a triathlon. That was on like my bucket list since I was 19, and I was a volunteer in the Ironman World Championships, which is like the Olympics of our sport. And I thought I need to do that before I end up in a wheelchair. So I started training for my first triathlon, never worked out, didn't have a pair of gym shoes, nothing. Changing my diet and realizing there's a lot more I need to change than just these things. But this has to be like a mental, spiritual, a physical, and an emotional change, and just really working on every area of my life. To the point that that year I had 4 MRIs done. They all showed the same 10 lesions. They were looking to see how fast I was progressing. And a year after living my life this way, and I had my next MRI, or my last MRI, all of my lesions were gone, and there was no signs of MS in my body at that time.
That is beautiful, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And also, I hope everybody also can hear that that was a lot of work.
It still is.
It still is.
Yeah.
It is commitment, and it is exercise. It is eating right. It is taking the supplements, making sure your diet is clean and beautiful, and not something that everybody can do.
It is, and I want to make sure I mention that there has been times in my life where I haven't followed what I do and have had lesions come back and have had symptoms. So I realize this is how I need to live. So this isn't in remission, or it's just when I do what I need to do, I stay well, and when I don't, I don't, and so it's a lot of work, and sometimes it's really exhausting, and sometimes it's exciting and amazing. It just kind of depends what else is going on in my life, but it's a lot of work for sure. And it was a big decision, to go against my doctors and do what I did. It was hard.
And you also talked about that first year. You talked about the emotional and the spiritual piece. Can you speak more to that?
So one of the things I realized that's really tied into a lot of diagnoses is sometimes trauma, from your past that you haven't really dealt with. And so I was really looking into that. Like I was reading articles about MS and all these autoimmune diseases, and I was seeing that was coming up in these articles. So I was like, that's interesting. And it just really got me thinking, like, what do I have in my life that maybe was a traumatic thing that I haven't dealt with, or what am I stuffing down? And what always would come up was my relationship with my father, which was always like the open wound in my heart, that thorn in my heart, always growing up. That although I had a dad that was home and, my parents were together, he was, for me, how I describe it, not the dad I needed, and the dad I thought I should have, I was like a very sensitive person. I needed a dad who was like loving and cuddly and sweet, and my dad was none of those things. And he was very harsh. I called him a rageaholic. You never knew what you're going to get with my dad. A very scary kind of guy. Could be very abusive, physically and verbally. As we got older, less physically, a lot, really verbally, and even with my mom and things like that. So, I had a lot of issues there, and I needed to stop ignoring it and stuffing it and start looking at it. And that was probably the hardest part, beyond changing my diet and starting to race triathlon and everything else I did, was that piece, which is still a journey for sure.
Isn't it amazing that the emotional and the spiritual piece can be harder than the getting up and running and exercising and eating right? Because those almost are outward, right? Those outward things are easier because those are something that we can reach out to. But when we have to reach in and walk backwards and retrace those painful steps, we want to run from those. Right.
Oh, yes. I always say any excruciating pain I felt with MS did not compare to going to that place.
Right.
That was awful, for me to dig all that up and really look at it for what it was,
So, also, people who are listening, I've known Aurora for years, and she's a phenomenal woman, both spiritually and physically, and as a mentor to so many people. But when anybody, and even people who we put on a pedestal and see them as being so strong, everybody has those deep wounds inside. I think that's part of our human spiritual experience, that we have to kind of dig those deep down. So we're going to dig down a little bit deep in Aurora's piece because she's so great at helping others. So we're talking about those parental relationships and that mind-body experience. So here is Aurora, diagnosed with a progressive disease that could put her in a wheelchair, and she's understanding the connection between her mind and body, and she has a situation that she's already discussed with God and having to realize the forgiveness there, right? And then now she's also getting the mind-body connection that is deep in. Now let's talk about that relationship with your father. At the time of your diagnosis, what was your relationship like with your father?
My relationship with my father's always been kind of non-existent, except through my mom. My mom's like the one that kind of tells him what's going on, and if they were coming to visit, he would be involved. But he's just not a person that gets to know you. He has no idea of my life or who my friends are. Never, from now through back to when I was young, and and so I didn't really have a relationship, but a lot of hurt and resentment and a lot of anger and bitterness. Like I was really, really angry for a long time.
It sounds like, and I talk about expectations a lot, that you expected to have that warm, cushy dad, and you didn't get that warm, soft place to land. You did get a dad that was around. A lot of people don't have that, but you did get that dad who provided for you, but you didn't get the soft, cushy dad that you had expected to get. So you had to kind of examine that.
I did, and I think as I grew up and became a mom and a wife, it almost intensified, because I thought, like, how could someone not want to hug their kids and love on their kids? How could you not want to find out everything about, like, who your friends are and what, I'm that mom, so I didn't understand, and it made me even more angry. Like, if I wasn't angry enough and resentful enough, and I would think, if I would have had this kind of a dad, I could have been this kind of a mom or this kind of a wife. I wouldn't have these issues in my friendships. I wouldn't, and it leaked into every area of my adulthood, my marriage, my friendships, my kids. And it was like a poison that leaked in, and I saw it. I didn't know how to get it out, because it was that bitterness and unforgiveness that kept going.
But as you walk that road backwards and see that's where it came from, were you able to, now that you saw where it came from, were you able to look at your dad any differently? Were you able to maybe walk your dad's steps a little bit and maybe see him? Because now you're an adult, so you can see him a little differently. Did you learn anything about your dad that helped you with your process?
I did. I learned a lot of things about my dad's childhood that were never told to us. Were told to my brother-in-law, because they kind of worked together for a little while, and he opened up, and he just had a really, really rough childhood. And I even think back now, like, wow, I mean, he actually did pretty well for, as much as I think back then, like, I would think, what a horrible father I have. He's just so awful. I think, wow, he had to overcome a lot to even parent us the way he did. Like, that was the best he could do. He didn't know any better. And even though that was kind of destructive for all of us, I think it could have been a lot worse. He had a really rough childhood, went through a lot of things and saw a lot of things. He grew up in Colombia in South America, in a very third world kind of environment there. And not that Colombia's a third world. I mean, it's, I don't want to offend anyone, because it's an amazing, beautiful city, and where he grew up, in the areas he grew up, it was that way. And he just experienced a lot of hurt and abuse and
a lot of poverty.
A lot of poverty. Started working at a very young age, and so at my son's age, actually, my son's 15. So he wasn't off, to getting taken to competitive soccer tournaments and all these things. Just a very different upbringing culturally as well. So I think as I retrace that, I try to look at my dad like that little boy who's also hurt and broken, and not this mean man who I would have this vision of. And that really changed my the way I viewed my dad, and just the relationship, because he tried. He did.
As a mom now, don't you wish you could go back and hug that young boy that is your father
Yeah.
and give him that hug and that upbringing that you wish he could have had, because what a different man he would have been.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I do. And I just think, I wish he would have shared some of that, I mean, I know it's age appropriate, maybe in our teens. It would have made him seem more human to me and not like this like mean animal I thought he was. And so it's taught me to, not like hide from my kids. Like it's okay that they see me in a certain, within certain, things that they see that I'm upset or crying, or because that was another thing. I would just try to make things look really good to them, and kids can sense everything,
Yes, they can.
And even when I was diagnosed, they were so young, they knew something was going on, and at that moment, I sat with them, I explained everything, I showed them everything in a very appropriate way, not to scare them, but I'm so glad I did, because now they see what God's done. They know where I'm supposed to be. They know where I am now. And it's been amazing for my family. But I've tried to be more open with my kids about certain things, because I think that really would have helped me to see my dad in a different way and be more understanding and compassionate towards him, So
your forgiveness journey with your dad has come to a place where you can see him differently, and he might not know that you've gone through this journey, because really forgiveness is for you.
Yes.
But you see him differently. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, I actually did a very intense year of really working on this in my life, because it was at the point that, like, my dad, he lived across the country. I mean, across the other side of the country, so I didn't see him that much. But when he would come and I'd hear his voice and I'd see him, it was like I was 11. I was 10. I was not the confident, strong woman I am right now. I was this, like, little broken girl, and because she was still there, and I hated it. And I felt like every time he left, I had to kind of get myself back together to who I am, but it was like I was stuffing that down, and in doing all of this work, it went from me literally not being able to hear my dad's voice without like taking me back to like when I was young, or things that had happened, or to really seeing him, like I said, like he's just a broken little boy who's hurting, who wants to be loved, and did the best he could, which was provide for us all the time. It was always like, I pay for this, I pay for that, and that's what he knew to show love, was really to just provide for us. And so now when I see him, that's how I see him. And it helps me, even like still he says things that are just like, oh, that before would just get me so upset and so hurt. And now I just see him in a totally different way. It helped me just view him for who he is inside, and not what he's seeing, what I'm seeing on the outside, because we all have that person inside of us that was hurt or broken, and we're trying to, whatever that was, and we're trying to work on ourselves. And I think it's important to look at people. Like I always tell my kids, everyone has a little hurting. Everyone has something they're dealing with. It might be different from yours, but there's something. So it changed my view for everybody, the way I view everybody, not just my dad.
Wow, that is beautiful and just so precious. And how did you feel that helped your mind-body connection with your MS?
I never thought about that. That's a good question. I don't know specifically, but I'm sure, because I always say, we're integrated beings. Everything is connected. So you can't eat all organic and be super athletic and not work on your spiritual life or your emotional life. You have to work on every area. And so I know that was a part that was missing with me, because I got down the diet thing. I got down being an athlete, all this stuff, like check. And then there was this era, it's like, I don't want to go there. I can be okay without that. So I don't know, maybe down the road, if I wouldn't have, maybe it would have, made a difference. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that it definitely has been a positive thing, because like I said, our bodies hold bitterness, our bodies hold resentment, our bodies hold all these negative emotions. You feel it, and it affects your liver, and affects all these different things in your body. And so I'm sure that something was being affected by me holding on to that in a very serious way that I did for all those years. So.
Well, thank you for sharing a very personal story about your father and about you. And I know that everybody can relate in some way about a journey with someone and about that unforgiveness that we pick up, those ugly, smoldering resentment, kind of going back to that moment when we hear that person's voice or that something, it sends us right back to that place.
Yeah.
And you're so right. It's very hard, and we just get all tense, and being able to see them differently helps us not go there to release that. That was really perfectly said, and it really is for you. But it was a gift you gave yourself, but it was also a present you gave your dad. And
yeah, I believe that. And I think too, like what I learned is that holding on to that unforgiveness, that bitterness it's a very selfish thing for yourself, because you're not looking outside of yourself and your issues with someone, whoever that may be. And that's why it's such a beautiful thing to look at everyone as they're hurting, and this all came from this hurt, instead of it's something against me. They did this against me, and that was a big, kind of next level way of thinking for me to kind of begin that healing with my dad, even though, in a lot of ways he's still the same person. But yeah, it made a big difference.
That was really great. And then also, I'm so happy to hear that you're doing so well.
Thank you.
And that, believe me, she still eats beautifully, and she still runs and bikes and swims. And also, where can people find you and get a hold of you? Because I know there's a lot of people out there suffering with MS that might have a lot of questions for you.
Yes. So I'm on Facebook. I have a private and a public page under my name, Aurora Colello, and then the public one's just Aurora Colello Public. I have Instagram. I have a website, auroracolello.com, which is very triathlon based right now, and I'm in the process of changing to be just more everything, health and my journey. And you can always just Google my name and read some of the articles written on me to read my story. And I love talking to people about what I've done and sharing with them that there's hope. Within this hopeless disease, there's a lot of hope.
And everybody know that not one thing works for someone and not everything works for another person. There's combinations, there's different ways, but that you do have choices out there, that you can try different ways. And it needs to fit your soul. It needs to, you have a choice. So knowing that, Aurora is a perfect example that she found what fit for her and her family. She did the research and do what's good that fits for you. And it's a perfect example. And Aurora, I applaud you for all your hard work, your daily work, for your spiritual growth, for your letting go of all that unforgiveness and growing, and also showing your children what forgiveness looks like.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Well, this has been Reverend Misty on the Forgiveness Solution podcast at Sacred Stories. Please subscribe, and also please try to get a hold of me at revmisty.com or send me an email at revmisty@outlook.com. It's been great being with you today, and I look forward to hearing from you.
I wish you bluebirds in the spring to hear your song, a song to sing, and then a kiss. More than this, I wish you love.